Marcus had never been the kind of man who liked surprises. He liked plans. He liked knowing what came next. He liked waking up in the morning, making his coffee, and following the same quiet routine he had built over the last 3 years. His apartment was clean. His work was steady. His life was predictable, and he liked it that way. So when his friend Dree called him on a Thursday evening with that particular tone in his voice, the one that was a little too cheerful, a little too casual, Marcus already knew something was coming that he would not enjoy. "Listen," Dree said, "before you say anything, just hear me out." Marcus sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. That is never a good way to start a sentence. Dree laughed. "Me and Keisha set you up on a date, Saturday. 7 o'clock. That new restaurant downtown, the one with the good steak. You're going." Marcus opened his mouth to say no. He had a lot of practice saying no to these things. Over the past 2 years, Dree and his wife Keisha had tried 4 times to introduce him to someone. Each time, Marcus had found a reason to cancel. He was tired. He had work. He wasn't ready. The truth, though, was something he kept closer to his chest and never said out loud. "Marcus," Dree said before he could speak, "you are 31 years old. You haven't been on a date in longer than I can remember. She is a good person, just go. One dinner. If it's terrible, you never have to do it again." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then he let out a long breath. "Fine," he said. "One dinner." He regretted it almost immediately. Saturday came the way Saturdays always do, too fast. Marcus stood in front of his bathroom mirror at 6 in the evening, adjusting his collar, then unadjusting it, then adjusting it again. He had texted Dree twice asking for more information. Who was she? How did they know her? What was her name? Dree's replies were infuriatingly short. "You'll see. Just trust us. Wear the blue shirt." He wore the blue shirt. The restaurant was called 1145 Grill. It had warm lighting and white tablecloths, and soft music playing just quietly enough that you could still hear the person across from you. Marcus arrived 5 minutes early and was taken to a reserved table near the window. He sat down, placed his phone face down on the table, and told himself to relax. He was not relaxed. There was something sitting in the back of his mind, something he could not name and did not want to look at directly. A vague, uncomfortable feeling. Like when you leave the house and can't remember if you turned off the stove. Except this feeling had been with him for years, and it had nothing to do with the stove. He picked up the menu. He set it back down. He checked the time. He straightened the fork beside his plate. He thought about leaving. Then the door opened, and a woman walked in. She was dressed simply, dark trousers, a neat cream-colored blouse, her hair pulled back. She looked around the restaurant once, then found his table, and she walked toward him with the calm, steady confidence of someone who was not nervous at all. Marcus looked at her face, and his entire body went still. He knew her. Her name was Simone. He had not seen her in 3 years. He had not said her name out loud in 3 years. He had, in fact, spent a considerable amount of energy over the past 3 years trying very hard not to think about her at all, not because he disliked her, but because she was tied to a memory he had buried as deep as it would go. She sat down across from him, folded her hands on the table, and looked at him with an expression that was calm and kind and just slightly amused. "Small world, Marcus," she said. He nodded slowly. His mouth was dry. "Small world," he agreed. They had worked together at a tech company in Midtown 3 years ago. She had been in the marketing department. He had been in it. They weren't close, friendly in the hallways, occasional small talk in the kitchen, the kind of comfortable familiarity that comes from seeing the same person every day without really knowing them. And then came the day Marcus did not let himself think about. It had been a Tuesday in October in the middle of a hard stretch of weeks. He had not been sleeping. He had not been eating well. He had been carrying something heavy for a long time, a struggle he kept entirely private, something he had only recently admitted to himself, and just once spoken out loud to a therapist. It was the kind of thing that felt too personal, too exposing, too fragile to share with anyone. The anxiety that had been eating at him for years. The dependency on alcohol he had been using to manage it. Small at first, then not so small. He had not told his family. He had not told Dree. He had not told a single person in his life. On that Tuesday in October, he had slipped into the break room on the 4th floor because he knew it was almost always empty in the early afternoon. He had sat in the corner chair and called his therapist, not for a scheduled session, but because he needed to hear a calm voice. And he had talked quietly, his hand cupped around the phone, about things he had never said out loud before, about how tired he was, about the drinking, about the way shame had built up around him so quietly and so completely that some days he couldn't feel anything else. He had been so focused on keeping his voice low that he did not hear the door open. He did not know anyone was in the room until the session ended and he lowered his phone and looked up, and there was Simone, standing near the coffee machine. Her back was half turned. She was very still. He did not know how long she had been there. He did not know how much she had heard. He had stood up, excused himself quietly, and left the room. She had not turned around. He had gone back to his desk. He had spent the rest of the afternoon staring at his screen. And 2 weeks later, he had resigned from that job and taken a position across town, and he had told himself that it was for career reasons, and that the break room incident had nothing to do with it. But of course it had everything to do with it. And now here she was, sitting across a white tablecloth from him, in a restaurant his best friend had chosen, on a blind date his best friend had arranged, and Marcus had absolutely no idea what to do with any of it. A waiter came. They ordered water. Simone looked at the menu with the same calm she seemed to carry everywhere, and Marcus looked at the menu without seeing a single word on it. They made small talk for a while. Careful, surface-level conversation. Where are you working now? How's Dree doing? Have you tried the food here before? Marcus answered everything and heard almost none of it. He was waiting for the moment she would say something about it, waiting for the careful, polite question that would tear the floor open beneath him. It did not come. Instead, after the appetizers arrived and a small silence settled between them, Simone set down her fork and looked at him directly. "I owe you an apology," she said. Marcus looked up. "What?" "3 years ago, the break room." She held his gaze and her voice was steady and quiet. "I walked in without knocking. I heard things I was not supposed to hear. I should have left immediately and I didn't. I've thought about that many times since and I'm sorry." Marcus was very still. The restaurant continued around them, the soft music, the murmur of other conversations, the small sounds of a normal Friday evening, and he sat in the middle of it feeling like the world had shifted very slightly on its axis. "You didn't have to," he started. "I wanted to," she said. "It's been on my mind, and when Dree mentioned your name a few weeks ago, I thought maybe it was a chance to say it in person." She paused. "I also want you to know that I never told anyone, not one person. What you were going through was yours and it wasn't mine to share." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He had imagined this conversation many times, or a version of it, some terrible version where the person on the other side used what they knew to diminish him or embarrass him or simply look at him differently. He had never imagined this version, the quiet one, the kind one. "Thank you," he said, and his voice came out a little rougher than he expected. Simone nodded. Then she picked up her fork again and said, "The food here is really good, by the way. Dree has good taste in restaurants, even when his taste in matchmaking is questionable." Marcus laughed. It surprised him, a real laugh, short and genuine. "That's a fair assessment," he said. And something shifted. It was not dramatic. There was no moment where the tension broke like a wave. It was quieter than that, more like a door opening just a crack, enough to let in a little air. They talked through dinner, Not about the blind date and not about 3 years ago, but about the kinds of things two people talk about when they are being honest with each other. About the city, about work, about the strange, specific exhaustion of keeping everything together on the outside when the inside feels like a completely different story. At some point, without quite planning to, Simone said something that stopped him again. "What you were talking about that day," she said carefully. "The drinking, I understood it more than you'd think." Marcus waited. "I had my own version of it," she said. "I'd been managing stress in ways that weren't great for a long time. Hearing you that day, the honesty of it, it actually pushed me to finally go talk to someone myself." She looked at the table, then back up at him. "So in a strange way, even though it was not your intention, and I know it wasn't a moment you'd choose to share, it helped me." Marcus did not know what to say to that. He sat with it for a moment, the strangeness of it, the way life sometimes connects things in ways that make no logical sense and yet feel, somehow, completely right. "I'm glad," he said finally, "I think." She smiled. "It's okay to not know how to feel about it. I didn't either for a long time." They stayed at that table for almost 3 hours. The restaurant filled up and then slowly emptied again. They finished dinner and ordered dessert, and then sat with empty plates and kept talking, because neither of them was quite ready to stop. It was not a romantic evening, exactly. It was something harder to name than that. It was honest. It was unexpectedly comfortable. It was the kind of conversation that leaves a person feeling a little lighter on the way out than they felt on the way in. When they finally left the restaurant, they stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the cool night air. Marcus said the evening was not what he expected. Simone said she hoped that was not entirely a bad thing. They exchanged numbers, not with any grand intention, just because it seemed like the natural thing to do when you've had a real conversation with someone, and you don't want it to be the only one. Marcus walked to his car. He sat in the driver's seat for a while without starting the engine. The street outside was quiet, just the soft amber of the streetlights and the occasional sound of a passing car. He picked up his phone and called Dree. Dree answered on the second ring, already laughing. "Tell me everything. How'd it go?" Marcus leaned back in his seat. He thought about the restaurant and the white tablecloth, and the moment Simone walked in and he felt the floor tilt beneath him. He thought about her apology and her honesty, and the way the whole evening had turned into something completely different from what he had been afraid of. He thought about the secret he had been carrying for 3 years, and the way it felt just slightly less heavy tonight than it had this morning. "It was the worst blind date I've ever been on," he said. Dree burst out laughing. "Come on, man." "I mean it," Marcus said, and then after a pause, "I think I needed it." Dree was quiet for a second. Yeah, Marcus stared out through the windshield at the quiet street. "Tell Keisha she gets 1 point. 1, don't let it go to her head." Dree was still laughing when Marcus hung up. He sat there a little longer in the silence of his car, in the orange glow of the streetlights. He was not cured of anything. He was not suddenly fixed or transformed or saved by one dinner with a woman who happened to know his secret. Life did not work that cleanly, and Marcus knew it. But something small had changed. The thing he had been most afraid of, being seen, being known, having someone look at the worst part of him and not look away, had happened tonight. And he was still here, still whole, still himself. The secret had held its power over him for 3 years because he kept it in the dark. And tonight, even in that small way, it had gotten a little light. He started the car and drove home through the quiet city streets, and for the first time in a long time, the silence felt comfortable instead of heavy. And